All right, official good morning, everyone. So we see a lot of good mornings in the chat, and we're just so thrilled to have you here. My name is Keelan Koning. I'm communications coordinator for 3CSN. Some of you know me from ePortfolios as well and other things. And just really happy to be here with all of you today and to introduce you. Some of you are quite familiar with Jennifer Escobar's work. She is one of our newest coordinators with 3CSN, but she has been working with 3CSN for some time with ungrading, which is a topic that is so near and dear to our hearts when we're thinking about equity. Grading is one of those things that's right at the heart of it, right? And for many of us during the pandemic, we started thinking, like, what can we do in order to make it, this isn't working, and what can we do? And so I know Jennifer's going to talk a lot more about that, so I'm certainly not going to go into detail right now, but I did want to just bring up a couple of little things before Jennifer gets started, and one of them is about 3CSN. So you may have been attracted to the topic and may not know about our organization, so really wanted to just share just quickly with you about our organization, which is, does anybody know that what it stands for, 3CSN? Can you pop that in the chat or say it out loud? Yes, Michelle wins the prize, California Community Colleges Success Network. Yeah, so California Community College something network, nice. Okay, all right, well, the reward is our love and appreciation. How about that? Okay, so, and if you nearly got it, then you're still winning. How about that? So we have been around for some time now, about almost 14 years. And so we're just really happy to provide professional learning opportunities across the state. And our mission is to develop leaders in California community colleges. And leadership to us doesn't just mean administrators. It means that we're all leaders from all of our roles. So that's really important, who have the capacity to facilitate networks of faculty, staff, and students for curricular and institutional redesigns in support of increased student access, success, equity, and completion. This is also related to the vision for success and guided pathways. And then just quickly to share our theory of change. Some of you have written your own theories of change or have seen these before, but this is really important to us. And the part that's really important, you can read this here, but we provide training on networking, and we use action research methodologies, which some of you are very familiar with. And then community college professionals will transform their identities and environments. So identity is a big piece too, right? A lot of us felt that very challenging during the pandemic. So our identities, our professional educator identities were really challenged at that time. So and environments to create communities of practice that will produce powerful learning and working across campuses, and this will lead to greater student success. So if you want to know more about 3CSN, please, we encourage you to ask, go to our website, things like that. And you will learn more as you go. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer, who is going to blow our minds right now, basically.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much, Keelan, and thank you for the music to open up our session. So I want to start by asking Keelan to put the Google Doc we're going to be using in the chat. And so the way the session's going to work is we'll be using this Google Doc to kind of ground us. It'll have all the activities, the readings, the links in there. And in theory, the Google Doc is supposed to accommodate up to 100 people. We have a contingency plan if for some reason it starts getting glitchy. So I just ask for you to be flexible with me, which is great because that's in the spirit of ungrading. Because normally our sessions have been around 50, 55 people. So I'm excited to talk about this and work with you. And so we just may have that. We may have to kind of go back and have a plan B just in case. But now I'm going to share my screen so you can see what I'm seeing, and that Google Doc will be there for you in the chat. Thank you, Keelan. Before we begin, I just want to draw your attention to some of these quotes here on that first page. It says, ungrading means raising an eyebrow at grades as a systemic practice distinct from simply not grading. The word is a present participle and ongoing process, not a static set of practices. I just realized there should not be a D there. Imagine a scenario where all students did well. What would that mean, or how would that look? Some might say that the curriculum is watered down, that the class is too easy. Others might suggest that grades are inflated. But is it the purpose of school supposed to be for all students to learn as much as possible and for all students to demonstrate a high understanding and synthesis of the content? Is it not feasible for all students to achieve at a high level? And then lastly, this quote for today: most people, including teachers, don't wake up one morning prepared to adopt radically different practices. And gradual change is fine, as long as we don't underdo it. In other words, the first tentative step we take shouldn't be the extent of our journey. So I thought those would be good for us to open up with. Those three writers are practitioners, are active researchers in the area of ungrading, which I'm sure a lot of people came into this session wondering, what is ungrading? So by the end of today, you'll be creating your own definition of what ungrading is. Like many concepts, it's difficult to kind of say this is absolutely, so for example, assessment, right, or teaching, or even learning. So it's difficult to say this is absolutely what everybody agrees this looks like. And just like if I were to say grading, again, kind of an elusive definition. Although for myself, I'm looking at grading as marking, right, as providing a letter, A, B, C, D, F, looking at a number, percentage, points. It's one thing, it's not multidimensional. And so when we look at assessment theory, we can see that definition that resonates throughout a lot of the literature. But to start, I invite you first to do whatever helps you learn and be comfortable in this session. So if you want to keep your screen on, I would love that. If you want to keep it off, that's fine. Muting, chatting. Be okay with being uncomfortable about reflecting on your grading practices. You're here, so I think that's probably a big part of why you're here, is to kind of see what this is about. Some of you have already reached out and said that you've been using ungrading methods. So we have people who are at different points in terms of their journey of understanding and applying ungrading. Keep student learning and equity at the heart of this conversation session. Share aloud when the space is open to discuss or not, that's okay too. And consider that there's multiple approaches to ungrading. There isn't just one way to ungrade. And so that really is going to be the bulk of the work and labor we're going to do in the session today. So I want to just do a quick overview of the 3 days. First of all, we're going to get into some introductions and goals for today. You can see at the bottom of the Google Doc on page 2 that there's an overview of these 3 days. Today's focused on introducing the concept of ungrading. Tomorrow is focused on assignments, and the last one is on syllabi. There's driving questions for each day. And we also will be having time to reflect and write about grading, doing some reading, looking at ways to apply it. And we're going to try something a little new for these sessions. Generally, these sessions have been an hour and a half. And what I was finding the last few times I've held them is that you'd get a group of people who would stay after and ask questions. So rather than, but it was outside of maybe the initial 90-minute session, which is great. So instead, I've decided to shorten the initial session, focus one whole day on just understanding ungrading, because that was usually part of day one rather than kind of the goal of day one. And the last 30 minutes, if you choose to stay, is going to be more open discussion, posing questions, sharing ideas. So that's something that's new, and I'm adopting that from a practice that Keelan uses in her e-portfolio workshops and series. All right, so if you are interested in earning a badge, you can look at the website that I shared in the initial welcome email. There's also a few links as well, but every day there will be one activity towards the end of that session, where you actually have time in the session to do it. And if you complete those 3 things and you attend the 3 days, then you can earn a badge for this series. So our goals for today is to reflect on the role of grading and the potential and current role of ungrading in the classroom, and to read and reflect on an article. I also have podcasts in there to enhance your own learning about ungrading. So we have some key questions. Why do you grade? What is and what should be the relationship between learning and grading? And then, of course, what is ungrading? So I'd like for you in the chat, let's say, just take a couple minutes. Many of you have already said hello, but I'm going to ask for you to write your name, pronouns, role, discipline, department, institution, and what you hope to learn today, or a question you have about today's topic of ungrading. Let's just take a couple minutes. And I will leave this up here as we're writing. And also, just full disclosure, I am an English instructor. This is not English focused. I definitely do a series focus on composition and writing, but not for 3CSN, generally within my college. So there's lots of, I have very intentionally selected examples from many different instructors and topics. So I've tried to label, when we get into some of the readings and the podcasts, what these instructors, what their area of expertise is. All right, so I would like us to shift to looking at the opening questions. We're going to have, as a writing instructor, I love to have time to write. If you don't want to write, if you just want to sit and think about it, that works very well too. But I want to ask for you to pick one of these questions to respond to. So one, why do we grade? And how does it feel to be graded? What do we want grading to do or not do in our classes, whether as students or educators? So that's the first, there's a bunch of questions in there. 2, what is the role of self-assessment and peer assessment in a classroom? And number 3, what would happen if we didn't grade? What would be the benefits? What issues would this raise for students and our teachers? Would we be forced to rethink our systems of evaluation? So I'd like to give you about 5 minutes to, on your own, not in the chat, but just for self-reflection, think and or write on your own for 5 minutes. And then we're going to have a couple minutes to share in the chat some key lines, or if you'd like to unmute and share aloud, we'll have time for that as well. So 5 minutes to select at least one of these questions and respond. Before we take a couple minutes to share aloud, if there are any of you who would like to share aloud, I'd actually like to just take a minute if we can take a look at the chat. It is full of a lot of questions. I see some struggles, but how do we reconcile institutional demands with learning and what we're trying to do in the classroom? I saw the quote, grading as gatekeeping. And that's for particular programs. The terms like ranking and sorting, looking at how do we make sure that students understand their progress in a class. If we're not using grades, like what are other ways to do that? So let's just take a minute to look through those. And that way we have just some understanding of each other's ideas as we move into sharing a couple of these ideas aloud.
I'll kind of, you did open it up, right? Okay. I was thinking I did not post anything in the chat, but somebody, the first comment I read was sort of echoing what I was thinking is, I haven't thought about the effect it will have on students and how they will have to sort of pivot in terms of how they identify and react to grades. And some rely very heavily on them. It's their motivation. It's, there's a lot of sort of good feeling with working for the grade. And I think it could be an interesting shift. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing that. We actually will also talk about in day 3 a little bit about messaging to students, because yes, it could be very alarming for students to go from a system that's very graded classes, even across disciplines, but even within the same discipline, and then say, oh my gosh, we don't have grades. Hold on. So absolutely, I think it's good to see lots of ideas around that messaging to students. Anyone else? And there's so much in the chat, so if it's okay, it's a very large group. All right, I'm going to just share something, kind of surface something about ungrading that we're going to look at a lot today. You'll see lots of instructors, lots of writers define ungrading differently, but one commonality, and I saw this come up in a lot of the comments, was reflection, right? And ownership, student ownership of learning. And so one of the threads you'll see in several examples is the role of reflection for students. Like, so I could have started by just saying, like, here's all these different definitions, right? This is how we're defining it, period, you know? But rather, one, it ignores the breadth of definitions of ungrading. And I've been looking at equitable grading systems for, I don't know, 10 years, and I've had questions since I started teaching in high school 20 years ago, and then the last almost decade in community college. But I only recently, the last 3-4 years, I've seen this term ungrading. Right, so I just wanted to say I look at it within equity, work about assessment, but I also wanted to highlight, like, you'll see reflection, you'll see student ownership of their learning, and there's lots of different ways to implement that in the class, because I'm sure there's already a question about how do we actually do this in a meaningful way? How do we do it? So I saw a concern early on. I'm a little nervous taking this on right before the semester is going to begin. So there's small ways to do it. But like Alfie Cohn said, we also don't want to go too small. I encourage you to take a bit of a jump in some ways. But let's go ahead and get into the kind of the bulk of the work today. And you'll see it on the top of page 5. And I'm going to share my screen, but you should have access to the Google Doc already. And so I've tried to label the subject if there's a particular subject that instructors are working through. But what I'd like for you to do is take a couple minutes to look through these different options. You're welcome to look at more than one, but I think it really, what you choose is going to speak to what you're most interested in for today. I would say for those really interested in learning about ungrading, it's maybe very new. Choice 2 and 3 especially are very helpful. And then there's a number of, I made sure I included some STEM examples. You'll see that for choice 1, you'll see that in choice 5. And Jessica Zeller is a dance instructor. So just giving some background, but take a couple of minutes to look through those options. Then we're going to take about 8 minutes to read or listen to whichever choice you've selected. And then you'll have a few minutes to respond on your own. So use this as an opportunity to learn more about how ungrading is taking shape. But especially if you're looking at choice 1, you'll see lots of different examples of ungrading. So even though I'm an English instructor, that was a really helpful one for me to conceptualize some of the things I do in my own class, even though they're looking at chemistry educators. So take a couple minutes to choose. All right, we're going to try something called the chat waterfall. I am taking this from someone else, and I'm sure others have heard about it, but I haven't done it in a session yet. So instead of pressing submit as soon as you finish typing, instead I'm going to ask for you to type in the chat, but don't hit submit until we'll say 4 minutes is up. Right? So put your response in the chat, just don't hit submit if you can help it. So let's take 4 minutes to write and reflect on what you've learned, I have some prompts up there. Think and write about what you've learned about ungrading assignments and activities, how it connects with what you already knew, and what questions you now have. So let's take about 4. All right, I'd like to open it up for a couple of minutes for discussion. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just make a quick change because we're going to have about half an hour for discussion. Instead, I'm going to ask for us to transition to working on your own grading definition. So I apologize, but we'll hold off. There'll be space if you're able to stay for the community hours from 11 to 11:30. Rather than rush discussion now, I think it would be better to hold off. But let's go ahead and take a look. If you're on the bottom of page 5 for ungrading definition, I'd like you to write just your own working definition of what ungrading is. So again, you can think about it for yourself. I know for me, where I am in my kind of experience as an instructor is I think a lot about what I'm saying to students, but I first had to say what it means to me. How am I defining it for myself. So we're all at different points in understanding what ungrading is. So however it helps for you to explain it, please do. And I'll go ahead and transition us to the Padlet. So just a few minutes. And also if you're interested in earning a badge, this is the activity that helps you earn the day one portion of the badge. In the chat, oh, Keelan's responding there. But there's also in this corner, there's this little plus sign, and that's how you post your response on the Padlet. So it'll open it up.
I also wanted to mention that the scrolling can feel a little strange the first time you experience it. So each column has, as you go down, like each column you have to, Jennifer, could you share how the scrolling happens on one of the longer ones? So each one has that. So you want to go to whatever column it is, and then you're going to, do this scrolling from there.
All right, we are at 11 o'clock. And so I want to invite you, if you're still responding on the Padlet, please do. And I'm going to shift. It feels a little rushed. My apologies. I probably should have cut this a little bit. I did not want to cut any time from that reading portion because I felt like that would offer a lot of explanation for what ungrading is. But I really wanted to highlight how we have so many different definitions and understandings of ungrading, even just from reading a handful of texts that are the same and with our own experience. So we'll get a chance to talk about it more in the community hours. But if you're planning to, let me share my screen here. Oops, wrong thing. There we go. And many of you have already jumped ahead, so that's great. If you're planning to stay for community hours, you'll notice on page 9, bottom of page 8 and page 9, that I have a table set up so you can put like a question. I'd actually like to use that as our starting point if you're staying for community hours. If you're not going to stay today, then please go ahead and use that first chart that starts around page 6. What worked, what didn't. Since we're meeting the next 2 days, what questions would you like us to explore? So I saw some very practical questions like, how do we do this on Canvas? And lots of big questions, right? Like, how do we reconcile like institutional demands and needs and requirements with ungrading in the classroom? So feel free to put your questions, your feedback, and we're going to transition in just a minute to community hours where we'll open it up. I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll have a chance just to look at questions, problems, concerns, maybe share some ideas. So I'll go ahead and just give you a moment to respond. All right, there's lots of questions. So I'd like to just pick one. I don't know whose it is. So if, and then we'll just open it up if you want to unmute. One question was, will students be honest in their self-assessments? Right, or maybe how students respond to assessing themselves, and how does that compare?
That was me. And this is not me, like I do a whole thing on authentic assessment and my goal isn't to catch students cheating or anything, but this is about credibility with our colleagues as well, where they're saying you're not just handing out A's. Every student's going to say they're going to want that they deserve an A. So it's kind of like, how do we, I think if every student does the work and they deserve an A, they should get an A. Like I'm not one of those bell curve people or anything, but how do we make sure that people realize that our classes are credible and that we are assessing student learning and student mastery, and that students don't just not have to show up and be there or present or doing work. It's just ungrading doesn't mean that they're not doing the work. I guess I think that we have to kind of, anyway, I'm rattling, sorry.
No, I think that's an important clarification because it kind of speaks to the concern of like our colleagues judging us, right? And I can speak to that about, and I invite us all to share. When I first started teaching high school, like immediately the feeling of having too many A's, and I saw that come up in some of the comments, was a concern. So you can imagine me as like 21 years old teaching high school, lots of veteran teachers, and I am getting this message of like, you can't have too many A's, right? Very directly, but also very indirectly, implicitly. And so I think that's a real concern. But the truth is, and again, it's different at every institution. So I'm not to suggest that it's just like cut and paste, but we never even really talked about what went into our grading. So, you know, an A in my class, you know, then you hear, oh, reputation, oh, they're focused on, this instructor really loves, just to give an example, Latin roots. So he spends, you know, all this time on roots, and that's kind of he does this big test, you know, how much were we actually talking about grading? So I think that's a really important piece. I can share a little bit. I do use a lot of self-reflection and self-assessment, and my students at the end, they'll tell me what they think their grade should be, right? And I say from the beginning, like Jessie Stommel, like Susan Bloom, like I reserve the right to, I don't use this language in my syllabus or even in class, but like veto the grade, override the grade. What I find from experience is that usually I have some students who will grade themselves lower than what I think their work attests to. So I might need to talk to them a little bit about that. But I also think that learning how to truly assess one's performance or learning takes time. So I see in terms of having students reflect multiple times throughout the class is really important, because the way they say, oh, well, I completed the assignment, right? So I think I learned well, versus maybe towards the end saying, you know, I really, I understood what you meant when you said my essay in the middle of the class didn't have a thesis. I didn't see that at the time, right? But now that I've written these other papers, I have a much clearer idea, like this thesis, and then I have them like quote themselves, right? So this thesis is different than that thesis. Even though there are different papers, it's hard to compare those two. So I think like learning over time is really important, but also the like working in how do we have students, like what does that look like? So another piece that I found, and I'm going to stop talking, is I've found really helpful is having student models. So as much as possible, I will ask students for examples of the finished papers, but also the reflections I'm asking for them to do continuously throughout the term.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And you mentioned syllabus language. Do you have some syllabus language you can share with us that we can copy and paste?
Oh gosh. So on day 3, there's tons of examples, including a couple former ungrading participants. So, but yes, I'd be happy to share. So
Thank you. That's great.
If you email me, I can just share my syllabus, but we will get into that with day 3 too. Other responses to self-assessment, or if there's something that you really wanted just to pose to the group, I'm looking at trying to look at the Google Doc too.
Can you guys hear me? I want to share something that I'm not sure. I've been having some audio issues. Hi, I'm Michelle, and I had kind of a light bulb moment during this workshop about self-reflection, because I've used grading contracts since 2018. So I haven't, and since 2017, I stopped using points or letter grades on any papers, but it wasn't until 2018 that I shifted to a contract for the whole class. But one thing I noticed this summer, I taught 2 critical thinking classes online, and I normally have students do 2 like check-in assignments where they're reflecting. Like the first one is for them to kind of tell me, you know, it's in the beginning, and I do one at the midway point that has more reflective questions on their own grades. And this summer, I decided not to do those assignments because I was overwhelmed with the grading. Even though I don't grade, I still give a ton of feedback, which I have lots to say about why that's way more meaningful outside of evaluation. I think students respond way more to feedback when it's not justification for a number of points or anything. But anyway, but in the summer, plus I felt like it was so much work for them to do the class in 6 weeks that I took those out because I didn't want to feel like busy work. And I hadn't really thought about it much until right now when we were talking about how important that reflection is. And I did have more questions, anxieties, challenges with people about their grade. And I think that cutting out that one step in the middle of the class, it didn't have them look at, well, how many assignments have I missed? Or did I not turn in my drafts? Or did I not respond to feedback? And it's so funny because I had not put those things together until this workshop. So I just wanted to thank everyone for emphasizing how important that self-reflective piece is with ungrading.
Tiffany, thank you, Michelle, for sharing. And Tiffany.
Hi, I feel like, with these kinds of things, a lot of times you get people who are already on board and kind of already doing this. And I feel like that's kind of who we're hearing from. And I've been incorporating some grading for equity practices like no zeros and, not penalizing late assignments and things like that. And I thought, like, I am really doing it. Like, I am really incorporating equity into my courses. And so this feels like a very, very radical shift. And so, I did the one reading and I'm hearing things, but I think it's so different than the way most of us went to school, what we experienced. And a lot of times we're repeating, what we experienced. And it's so different than the way the expectations our institutions have for us. Because at the end, we need to give them a grade. And so I don't know. I just wanted to say that I'm not like, I'm playing with this idea. Like, I feel like I'm kind of struggling with it a little bit. And I know it's just day one. So we're still just building the foundation, but I don't know. It just seems like a lot. It seems like such a huge shift. And again, I just thought I was doing something really different. And I don't know, I guess I just want to share that, like, I have a lot of hesitation. I'm not necessarily like sold on it. And I think I just need more information about it. I mean, on the surface, I can definitely see how it's beneficial. I think it's definitely moving away from a more Eurocentric model. And I'm all about that in decolonizing my class. But it does seem like a bigger leap than I guess I've taken so far. And I don't know, I just wanted to share that, and hopefully I'm not alone.
No, thank you so much for sharing it. It is definitely radical because grades have been a technology we've used for so long in K-12, and in higher ed. Although I will say, like, the K-12, specifically like K-5 and elementary school, have also started playing with like standards-based grading and not using letters, although it seems to fluctuate. So these shifts are happening elsewhere, but also the pandemic really brought to light, when we saw the UCs in Cal State say, oh, we can take more passes, right? Pass than we did before. So I think it's helpful to, thank you so much, Tiffany, for surfacing that, because it is a lot. It is a lot. And I was wondering if you could share, do you mean a lot in terms of like understanding what it would mean for your class, a lot as to what might be the benefit versus like what you're doing now? I'm just trying to understand.
I think a lot in terms of like, it feels like a very significant pedagogical shift. So I think a lot in a lot of ways, but I think like it would just shift the structure of my class so much, and it would shift the type of assignments which is not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but to make that kind of radical shift, like, takes a very radical mindset shift that I am open to, definitely. But, that's kind of where I'm at, is like grappling with it, like the amount of work it would take to really reflect these ideas of this approach. I have to have a very firm foundation to work from. And I guess, it's just day one. And so the ground is shifting, and it's kind of like, whoa, what does this mean? And what would this look like? And it feels like very significant. Whereas the grading for equity stuff, some of that it's significant, but it felt more easily applicable, and to kind of fit what I was already doing. And maybe that's not necessarily the right thing. Sometimes the radical thing to do is the thing to do. But that's just kind of the place that I'm at.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And we will take a look. Day 2 will be looking a lot more at assignments, and day 3 looking at syllabus language, especially with the mind of like what faces students, right? So I used to do this workshop differently, and I would put intro to ungrading like the first half and then assignments after, and it may not work. I'll find out, right? I'll reflect, I'll get feedback from people, like participants, but it felt like I needed to spend more time with just the concept of ungrading. So that's why it's structured that way. So I hope that change is beneficial. I have a number of people. Will have a Tiffany, and then Yazdan, and then Joel.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of piggyback on that a little bit with what Tiffany had brought up, you know, around ungrading. Like I love the idea of it, and I've wanted to do this for a really, really long time. So I teach English composition. I have a very process-focused class where students, you know, submit things in stages to really emphasize the writing process and this recursive idea. And I'm worried that students will see those assignments now as, say, optional if I take on this ungrading. Like, will they interpret that as I don't have, like, you know, I don't know. And it's one of those, I would be lying if I said I don't have those concerns in the back of my mind. I'm going to try this semester, but I think I have a lot of anxiety around that. The other part is one of my classes is entirely online. And, you know, like with discussion boards, community building, like I also have students do hypothesis annotations. And again, I worry, will those assignments be perceived as optional? And then what do I do with that? And I love this idea of handing the grading to the students and they get to pitch their grade. And I mean, it really was mind blowing to me to just kind of let go of that control. But at the same time, what do I do if there's a student who didn't do those assignments? So I think that's what I'm having a hard time grappling with this is like, I find these assignments that might seem pointless to other people, but they are meaningful. And I do have them reduced down to only what's necessary. And also at our school, I'm constantly hearing, you know, the whole adage, students don't do optional. So then because that's constantly thrown around at our institution, now it's like, well, then will they perceive this as optional? Does that make sense? I hope I make sense. I don't know.
No, it does. And I can't differentiate. If I put in the chat, if there's somebody else who'd like to share, Michelle was responding in the chat. You can still have required assignments to pass a class or to earn a certain grade. Does anyone else want to unmute maybe and speak to that? Or Michelle, if you'd like to speak to that.
I'm happy to speak to that, but I know other people have their hands up, so I don't want to cut in line if I can wait until after.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Yeah, I like for my class, and again, I don't want to just talk about my class because I realize I'm an English instructor, and there's lots of people with lots of experience in different disciplines here. But to get an A, you have to complete all the assignments. To get a B, you have to complete all the assignments. So it's the baseline expectation. But the hard part is what is essential. And like you, Tiffany, I'm saying process is key, drafting is key. What I can't control is if they did the draft, they really took time with the draft or they didn't. That is a realization that comes through their own reflection. And so that has alleviated, I'm like, they'll often reflect, I've never really drafted before. And I noticed when I took the draft seriously, my paper, you know, was more effective, did more of what I wanted it to do, right? And I'm sure that's something that transfers and translates to other disciplines as well, right? If you're taking time with the subject, if you're wrestling through it, then you're probably, and especially with writing, right? So that's just a quick response there. And Michelle, thank you. And Yazdan.
Thank you very much for allowing me to talk, and thank you very much for this session. One thing I wanted to mention here is that about the grading, do not forget, if you want to achieve something general, it should be for every countries. I have lectured in France, and I can tell you the grading there is quite different from the US. And when I see here what we are talking, I thought, okay, that's great, but you know, this is not global. We should think about something like that. However, I know the anxiety of students here in the US. Also, I have seen some of the companies, how they use this opportunity to select the students, because you know, grading is very important. So the only thing I came up is that I used specifications grading, giving the students more chances to make their grades better, improve their grades, or at least come up with something they think it is correct. Thank you.
Thank you so much for helping us remember having a global perspective. I'm going to put somebody's name in the chat who works a lot with Jesse Stommel and talks a lot about humanizing education and speaks a lot to reflecting and assessment. So I'll put her link to her blog in the chat. Joel.
Hi, thanks for letting me ask my question. I typed it in the Google Doc, but I was just wondering if there are any math faculty here, other than myself and Lynn, we're both from MPC, that are here, and if they've tried any of these ungrading strategies in their courses. I read the article, the very first one, on the chemistry instructor, and sort of like some of the things they did. And I can kind of see how that could be adapted to math, but math is a very different subject than, say, English. Like, the feedback you can give on a paper on how they can improve things, and like the whole idea of drafting and whatnot, like that kind of works great in math. But like, for instance, my statistics or my calculus classes, like when they take a test and they don't get full points on a problem, quite often it's a simple little arithmetic mistake, or if it's a little writing thing that they have to do, they just slightly interpreted it wrong. And so like a lot of the points that my stats students lose on assessments, I feel like are for minor things, and lots of minor things can add up very quickly. And I've read, other sources on, how to be a little bit more equitable in grading in math, like letting them, do corrections or dropping low scores and that sort of thing. I'm just really curious how ungrading, like at its heart, could be adapted to like a real skills-based course like math. I don't know if I articulated my question well, so I apologize if I did not.
Jennifer, would it be okay if I address this one? Okay, so we actually have, last summer, we had a cohort for e-portfolios, which is a nice complement, plug, but it's a nice complement for ungrading. And then we had folks that went from that into Jennifer's ungrading sessions. And then I was working really closely in a similar community to what we are building here, to have folks kind of think through it for the rest of throughout the fall semester and into the spring as well. And one of the faculty that was part of that group is a stats professor. She also teaches stress management and other courses. But I would love to, perhaps, Jennifer, if it sounds good to you, maybe she could come to community hours tomorrow if she's available, and she can talk about that, because she did this very successfully with her students. It was this particular one. She did a summer course, and then she did it in the fall, and she continues to do it. But she has some really good ways that she is building. She's bringing it in. So she uses the e-portfolio, and then they build from there, and then she uses ungrading in her courses. Does that sound good? Yes, no?
Yeah, that sounds good. Sorry, I
Okay.
got like a million chats after my
Oh,
question,
I know, you're
so
very famous now.
I was too
You
busy reading
are-
those. My bad.
Yeah, you're Zoom famous. That's right. That's right. That's the kind of famous to be. Okay, so yeah, we'll bring Maria.
And tomorrow too, I don't like to do breakouts on the first day of ungrading. So I can have a good sense of humor about grading and ungrading now, because I've done this for years, but I know the very first time I started talking about it, I was terrified. So, and I was like, not kind of, I don't know, it was just really, maybe I'm just projecting my anxiety on everybody, but I try to avoid the breakouts the very first day. And so we will get into breakouts tomorrow. So if it sounds like it would work well, I'll just try it. Maybe we can have like math, and we can have sciences and stuff, and then people can self-select into those breakouts. And that way you get people from the same discipline working and talking together when looking at how to apply it for assignments and then later for syllabi. We have some time for more questions. There's a ton of questions on there. Does anyone want to unmute or share their question aloud? I don't see any raised hands right now.
Well, I can go back to answer some of the concerns that a few people mentioned earlier, if that's okay, but I don't want to be like a conversation hog. I'm just, because I know people are saying, how do you have a letter grade? So I just want to say the way I've been doing grading for the last 4 years, it's not like I have to give a letter grade at the end of a class. I have no option. I teach all different levels. Well, now there aren't that many different levels of composition, which is a good thing. But am I able to share my screen? Are participants able to do that? It looks like I can. Can I try? Can you guys see my screen now? It says grading contract. Okay, so, and I'm not saying this is perfect. This is a pretty simple one. This is a more recent one I used online. So I just wanted to throw this up here as an example, how it doesn't mean that there's no evaluation at all. It doesn't mean there's no way I give them a letter grade. I don't have my students give themselves a grade. Considering some of the emails I got after the summer, I would be really reluctant to do that in my classes anyway, because I had someone who barely got a C according to this contract and was emailing me saying, can I just give her an A? So I was really, that's bizarre though. That's probably happened once in 4 years. Like literally it's happened one time in all my classes 4 years. But so when I grade papers, I just do a complete plus, complete or incomplete. Those are the only 3 things that I have when I'm giving feedback on papers. And I don't want to get too much. I always give feedback on a draft though. I give much more extensive feedback on a rough draft than I do on the final draft, because to me, I don't understand the point of giving a bunch of comments on something that's done that they're not coming back to. Like that is completely illogical to me. And I've been teaching comp for 20 years. So and the students love it. They're so responsive to the feedback, and they actually do the changes because they know that it will help them get a higher grade. I hate to still say grade, but they do want to at least pass the paper or get a complete plus. So like you can see they have these different things they have to do for each letter grade, and they're allowed to miss a few. When I teach in person, the students help co-create this chart, but that is very carefully scaffolded. We talk about their goals. We review the CMOs for the class together. We do a whole activity where they put the CMOs, the course measurable objectives, in their own words. And then it's like, you have to have these skills at the end of the class. So what norms, what policies, what criteria will help you meet that goal? So it's not like it's just randomly that they're coming up with this, but when they're involved in that process, it makes a big difference too. And usually they have harsher standards than I do for things like absences. They'll say to get an A, you shouldn't be able to miss any classes. And I always say, I don't think that's reasonable. So I don't want to take up the rest of the time. I want to leave time for other people, but I'll type my email into the chat. And if anyone wants to talk more about this, feel free to contact me, or if I can help in any way. And again, this is just a really basic, quick thing. How do I stop sharing? How do I stop talking? Okay,
Michelle, I also wrote in the chat, if you would share that with me, I can also put it as part of the list of resources that we'll go through on Friday. So I would love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I also wanted to, there was one here. Sorry, I lost track of which one. Is there anyone else who had a question that they wanted to pose? Rhiannon.
Hi, just real quick, I have to bounce into my office hours, but oh, it looks like Helen just answered my question. All right, thank you. This has been awesome. I can't wait to come back tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much.